Hello everybody, Jediwarlock here, and welcome back to another video here on the channel. As you might have seen in one of my recent videos, I did finally hit the max level of 140 in Lord of the Rings Online after questing through the newest expansion to the game, Fate of Gundabad. Continuing the Legacy of Durin questline from the previous War of Three Peaks expansion, this final chapter of the story tasks players with entering the fallen dwarf kingdom of Gundabad and reclaiming it alongside the armies of the dwarves. There are 7 new areas to explore, each with their own perils you must overcome on your way to max level, and some are definitely more player-friendly than others. Today, now that I've had some time to think about the expansion as a whole, I'd like to give you all my casual player review of the expansion, including the story, the quests, and the region design. There will be some spoilers in this video, but I'll try to keep them to a minimum. So with all that being said, let's get right into it. Now, if you haven't played through the first half of the Legacy of Durin questline in Elderslade, I highly recommend you play through that portion of the story before entering Gundabad for the first time. The story is going to make a lot more sense, and unless you're already a hardcore raider, you'll get a few good pieces of gear to increase your survivability in the new zones. Following the events of the last raid, Amdan Damul, the Bloody Threshold, you and the expedition enter Gundabad and begin to secure the area. As you travel from one zone to the next following the epic storyline, you meet up with old friends and make new allies, and even face familiar enemies, which I was surprised about going into this expansion. After the destruction of Angmar several years ago at this point, to my knowledge, the remnants of the Angmarian and the Hillmen traveled across the Misty Mountains and established new strongholds in the north regions of Gundabad. Interestingly, a group of dour-hand dwarves can also be found in this area, still bound to the fate of Angmar, but looking to forge their own destiny. Both of these inclusions, I think, are perfectly natural progressions for these groups, and it will be interesting to see where their lore continues in the future. One other tie-in to previous lore that I thought was both tragic and necessary was the failure of the Iron Garrison in Moria. The dwarves you helped reclaim Moria with years ago join you again in Gundabad and explain that Moria once again had fallen into darkness. I knew this was bound to happen at some point, as in Tolkien's established lore, Moria would go unclaimed for a long time after the events of Lord of the Rings, and players had been speculating for a while now as to how the developers would explain this inconsistency. Going back to the current story, I feel like the epic storyline alternates between really well done and, okay, but why is this part of the main storyline? There are multiple points where what you're doing feels like less of an epic fantasy journey and more of a silly chore list. While the broader story of reclaiming Gundabad is pursued throughout numerous smaller quest lines, the epic story feels, at times, totally separate from the objective at hand. Why do you spend a whole chapter of questing helping a random dwarf negotiate a work contract? Not sure. Why is one of the longest quests in the epic story helping a dwarf impress his crush? Also not sure. While these subsections miss the mark in terms of relevance and interest in my opinion, they are thankfully few and far between. The rest of the story fits in well with the regional quests, and brings together a lot of lore from the War of Three Peaks and Grey Mountains expansions in a satisfying, if not totally complete, conclusion. I expect the developers left a certain few enemies alive, I'm looking at you, Hrimmel, as part of a, as of now, unreleased instance or raid tier in the future. So I can't fairly label the story as inadequate if there's the potential for further material at a later date. The pacing of the epic story is, apart from the aforementioned examples, is usually comfortable, and doesn't leave you feeling trapped in a zone after you've completed all the other content. Conversely, it also doesn't push you to leave an area too quickly, and in the few cases it did for me, it wasn't a big deal to finish up the few remaining quests I had before moving on. Overall, the story is a seamless continuation of the War of Three Peaks storyline, developing the main characters and conflict while introducing new ones. If it was the only questline available in the expansion, I would have been underwhelmed, but thankfully, there are a variety of other quests to complete in each region that make the expansion feel complete and engaging. As most LATRO players are aware of by now, the quest design in a region can make or break how it is viewed by the community, especially casual players. When it comes to LATRO's newest expansion, I'm happy to report that Gundabad overall has an excellent quest flow within each region. It seems that Standing Stone Games has slowly been perfecting their world quest design, and that system persists into this expansion. The quest hubs are logical, mostly well placed within the zones, and they effectively deal out a large number of quests that value your time and keep you, in most cases, nearby for an efficient questing experience. For quests located farther away from a base camp, many that focus on enemy fortifications are also tied to auto-bestow quests that activate when you approach your destination, allowing you to grab even more XP in a single area and making the trip out of town seem worthwhile. While I mentioned the epic storyline doesn't always seem to focus on the most relevant story arcs, the regional quest lines consistently drive the story forward and build toward a major encounter near the end of the region. From infiltrating a hobgoblin stronghold to discovering a hidden fortress high above ancient mines, the culminating adventure of each region feels rewarding and offers a sense of progression beyond that of just leveling. These smaller segments of story feel like individual adventures that can be completed in just a few hours, granting players with convenient stopping points throughout their journey in Gundabad. The only complaint I have about the regional quests were a few instances of backtracking to an area I had been to previously, as two separate quest lines had led me there at different times. But this only happened once or twice and wasn't a major pain during my experience. As a final note, while questing in Kar Bronak, the main questline seemed to end rather abruptly, and there was a little bit of text on the page that said, "The story of Kar Bronak will continue in a future update," or something like that, which I thought was interesting and again points to the developers not being ready to close the door on the story of Gundabad after all. So even though it seemed the least finished of all the regions, it's likely we'll get to visit this area again in a future update. But before we get into this talk of revisiting certain areas, I really should talk about the different regions you'll be working to reclaim within Gundabad, and whether or not you'll be able to find your way around in them. For this section of the video, I think it'll be best to go region by region, but briefly I want to discuss the general feel of what Gundabad feels like to travel through and quest in. At its heart, I believe the Fate of Gundabad expansion is both the spiritual and, in a way, physical successor to its predecessor, the Mines of Moria. Despite being released over 12 years apart, both expansions deal with the trials of the dwarves, involve vast underground kingdoms, and evoke the themes of loss, reclamation, and mystery. Compared to most of Middle-earth, and what we see in our everyday lives, these environments are unfamiliar and intriguing, and Gundabad does a great job of iterating upon Moria's otherworldly areas without feeling too derivative. Each area is visually distinct, and yet still fits with the overall feel of the realm, developing a varied but realistic set of areas to explore over the course of 10 levels, and with a few exceptions, I enjoyed the challenge of navigating new terrain on my hunter. When you first enter the gates of Gundabad, you'll encounter the sprawling noble district of Madugard, once the center of the dwarves' luxury and power. The zone is circular, revolving around the massive pit in the center, with tiered staircases leading to higher ledges and down to lower ones. Once you get used to the style of the region, it becomes much easier to navigate, but before traveling around the main loop, it can be a challenge to get around. Now, when we talk about Deepsgrave, the mining and machining center of Gundabad, I'd first like to start by saying Standing Stone Games really tried something new and experimental with this area. Instead of a sprawling horizontal region, the developers opted to focus on the vertical, with numerous different levels of bridges and walkways linking separate areas of the map. A spiral staircase runs down the center of the region, which is the primary way to transfer between levels, but there is also an elevator located in a more obscure corner. This is by far the most frustrating area to get around in, as sometimes you can be standing right on top of the quest objective on the map, but in reality, you're actually one level above or below where you need to be. Thankfully, this isn't the most major zone in terms of questing and story, and if you're efficient with your quest grouping, it should go rather quickly. After Deepsgrave, the Pit of Stone Jaws is a welcome sight, a sprawling, glittering cave with virtually no weird staircases or levels to manage. This is probably the most traditional zone in terms of region design, with maybe the exception of Carbronak, but it is by no means boring in terms of design. Scouting through the tunnels to locate the hidden hobgoblin stronghold and ascending through the caverns into the houses of rest are immersive experiences, not to mention descending into the deep beneath Gundabad subregion later in the epic story is probably in my top 10 most beautiful places in the game, both from a visual and story perspective. Easy to navigate and easy to enjoy. If you're looking for a harsh, bleak wasteland, Carbronak is the place for you. The region is more or less shaped like a big Y in terms of major roadways, and the quests are very intuitive and easy to follow on the sloped, rocky terrain. The region perfectly represents the remnants of Angmar that linger here, and it serves as a microcosm of the same parallel between Gundabad and Moria, a new region reminding players of an old one. The ancient birthplace of Durin, the first dwarf lord, the dark lake known as Glooming Tarn, sits in the far west of Gundabad, undisturbed for centuries. But with the recent incursions of the Angmarim, the protections put around the cave have been destroyed, prompting the dwarves to enter and pursue the intruders. The region is easy to navigate, with basically all the quest areas being located around the edges of the lake, and conveniently placed boats allow you to travel from one side to the other. Not a lot else practically to discuss with this region, but it is very pretty for screenshot purposes. North of Glooming Tarn, you can find the underground forest of Cloven Gap, named for the fallen section of ceiling visible high above the cavern floor. A river runs through the middle of the region, bisecting the terraced gardens and ledges that step upward away from the shore. In my opinion, while it is a beautifully designed region that is undoubtedly a callback to Moria's gardens of Thurak Bazan, it is hard to navigate, and the roadways marked on the map are sometimes inconsistent with the actual placement of ramps and roads. Getting from one place to another is a bit of a chore, but once you're at your destination, you should be able to find your way back to the quest hub. Last but not least, at the very top of Gundabad are the Welkin Lofts, the snowy peaks and valleys home to some of the enemy's strongest forces. You'll find yourself dealing with Angmarim, hobgoblins, and even frost drakes on your way to the summit, where the, almost, final battle of the expansion takes place. The region has a simple, linear pathway in terms of progression. The only way to go is up. I only had one inconvenience with traveling in this zone, and that was when I went through a secret passage and wound up in Manugard, only to discover the door had locked behind me, which is what I get for exploring cool side tunnels, I guess. I couldn't find any quest that goes along with this tunnel yet, but it is pretty cool the developers just decided to add that in there for some reason. As a whole, I think Gundabad has some really neat regions, and most of them are fairly easy to travel through. The environments give players a variation from zone to zone that prevents the gameplay from getting stale, and it was a fun adventure to go through and explore each one while questing and gathering footage for this video. So, after talking story, quests, and region design, would I recommend purchasing Fate of Gundabad for your own account? In my opinion, yes. While the standard edition costs $40, it's important to keep in mind that Latro is free to play, and the expansion unlocks a lot of content that will keep your characters relevant in the newest crafting, PvP, and instance and raid content with the new level cap of 140. For those hesitant about making the purchase on the Latro market using real money, the expansion will be released on the in-game store in a few months, allowing you to cover some of the cost with your hard-earned Latro points. It took me over 10 hours to reach max level from 130, and I haven't even begun to finish all of the additional content like deeds and gathering instance gear. So in my opinion, it is well worth the money if you've been taking a break from the game and are considering jumping back in. Looking forward to seeing you all back in Middle-earth. Thank you all so much for watching. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new to join the Jedi Order, comment down below with your thoughts, and until next time, peace.